As you see, I am the founder of the École Bilingue Montessori du Val-de-Marne outside of Paris, France. It was a bilingual school, and it became a trilingual school in 2012, and then we moved and became a bigger school in different premises, now known as E.M.I.T, École Montessori Internationale Trilingue de Nogent-sur-Marne outside of Paris, France. I'm a child psychologist before I became a Montessori teacher. I did my A.M.I. training in Paris in 1988. Just a brief history on the school that I ran for 35 years. I no longer take care of that. I'm running around doing other things. But the school that I founded in 1989 was, and still is, a private non-subsidized school with the Académie de Créteil. It is a charter signatory school, which means that the A.M.I., ISMM, the Training Institute of Paris, and the A.M.F, Association Montessori de France, got together and set up a charter for schools. Today in France, there are about 250 Montessori schools, named Montessori schools, and there are about 15 charter schools that recognize the criteria of what AMI requires. The school became E.M.I.T, and it's located next to this historical monument, and in September 2022, the school went over to be part of a group of schools with France École. And this is the historic monument. That's just the view that the elementary school children have from their classroom. It's a very nice, it was the last hall in Châtelet-les-Halles in the center of Paris, and it was for selling poultry at the time. What we'll see together is, I'll just do a very quick, very brief introduction of the Montessori institutions in France, Maria Montessori's stages of human development. We can't talk about language development if we don't look at those specific planes or stages of human development. We'll take a look at the sensitive periods of development. Plane 1, plane 2, the absorbent mind, the understanding mind. Why LSF? Why French language, sign language for the deaf as a third language? And the advantages of multilingualism as a means of integration. And if we have time, a couple questions I'll try to answer. So let's take a look at the institutions very quickly. We have the AMI that was founded in 1929 in Amsterdam, and then we have the affiliated institutes, training institutes. There is the ISMM that has an institute just outside of Paris in Nogent-sur-Marne, and in Lyon for 3 to 6, and in Montpellier and Montreuil for the 6 to 12 level. And then there's the CFMF, Centre de Formation Montessori pour la Francophonie. That's next to Geneva on the French side. That's for 6 to 12 as well. So today France has 5 different institutes where people can be trained. And our next goal with Jackie is to make sure that Madagascar eventually has a training center so that the teachers can be trained. Then we have the AMF, Association Montessori de France, which is the one and only society, AMI society, in France. It was founded in 1950. I was a member of the board for 18 years. And there's also the Fondation Montessori de France, which was created in 2014. And then you have all the Montessori schools. So before I start talking about multilingualism, I would just like to say that over the last 3 years, the world was turned kind of upside down, and we were all topsy-turvy all over the place and trying to adapt constantly to new situations. As a director of a school, it was extremely complex because we were adapting not so much on a monthly basis not on a weekly basis to new things, but we were adapting several times a day to new situations on a daily basis. And it was extremely complicated, extremely difficult. And I think that even today, people are still struggling to live normal lives again. And it's one of the greatest pleasures to all be together today, as a matter of fact, at this Congress, because we can be in person, as opposed to on a screen. Another thing that I'd like to start off by saying is that Montessori is an aid to life, from birth to death. And we know that today. And it's so important, Montessori is so important throughout life and in helping the human being to learn to adapt to different situations. So what can we as adults do in order to accompany the child on a path of their own development? How can we help them to have what they need to adapt to all the changes that they will encounter throughout their life? This ability to adapt is essential and will become increasingly so. Children must become confident, thoughtful, creative, and fearless. During these uncertain and exceptional times, we need to understand the child's basic needs, as well as the environment in which he or she will be evolving. At E.M.I.T of Nogent in France, the trilingual Internationl Montessori school, we are in the new norm, and we must continue to follow the child's development. We have been on a mission for educating for a new world since 1989. Maria Montessori's developmental framework should guide us through the 4 developmental planes that help build the human being. The environment, according to the 4 developmental planes, is made up of the psychic, physical, intellectual, and emotional aspects. Today, there are different methods of education around the world, but Montessori's approach is to respect the child's development as a whole, a holistic way of looking at education. Montessori pedagogy is a world-renowned pedagogy supported by UNESCO. It is the only pedagogy that has endured and continued to develop since its first children's house in 1907. Now let's take a look at multilingualism. It was interesting because I did attend a multilingualism or bilingualism workshop with the Institute of Prague in February 2021 with Heidi Philippart. And it's interesting to note that 50% of the world's population is already bilingual or multilingual. Young children around the world can and do acquire 2 languages simultaneously, known as BFLA, Bilingual First Language Acquisition. This is the process of a baby or toddler learning 2 languages simultaneously, and neither language can be called a first or second language. Here we look at the 4 planes of development. On the first developmental plane is when the family comes first and foremost. Another aspect of this first plane is for that there are several. It's for language development, and we come to our subject, which is multilingualism at the E.M.I.T in Nogent. If we understand this first plane of development from birth to 6 years of age, we need to have exemplary behavior for the small child because he absorbs absolutely everything without any filter like most adults do. He can absorb our face-to-face conversations, our telephone conversations, our remote meetings on the computer, our fears, our anxieties, our happiness, our peaceful moments, and our pleasures. This is one of the reasons why we need to avoid television images, the news, which can be a great source of very great anxiety, video games, screens, in general, during this first plane of development. Current neuroscience and a number of research studies carried out by Patricia have clearly demonstrated that language learning is richer through real-life experiences and not through television images or what a child can see on a screen. Your children, young children, our children, take their environment as their guide to life. The family and school environment must take this into account. If we want children to develop to their full potential, we need to understand these developmental plays and adapt the environment and the way we look at them. Solange Denervaux, neuroscience researcher at the University of Geneva, bioengineer and Montessori AMI educator for 6 to 12-year-olds, has been working on an assessment of the impact of the Montessori environment on brain development of children aged 5 to 12. She called her last conference at the General Assembly of the Publique Montessori Association of France. Montessori in the light of current scientific discoveries. We can affirm today what Maria Montessori already knew in the 20th century. An environment adapted to children's needs is primordial for good development. Montessori pedagogy was developed when cultural exchanges were not as frequent as they are today. The need to learn other languages was not as great as they are today. That being said, Maria Montessori had traveled all over the world and observed children in bilingual or multilingual countries and how this was just simply a way of life for them, as in India, Belgium, a multitude of countries on the African continent, Canada, Austria, Switzerland, just to name but a few. Let's take a look at the two stages of development. Infancy and childhood. From the absorbent mind to the understanding mind of the child. The absorbent mind. From birth to the age of 6, this is infancy, when the child's mind is like a sponge, ready to absorb everything unconsciously until the age of 3, and increasingly consciously until the age of 6. It's this period that Maria Montessori called the child's absorbent mind, and it's during this period that the child says, "Teach me to do it for myself," or "Teach me to do it by myself." And it's during this period that the young child absorbs different languages effortlessly. What Maria Montessori knew was that the learning of 2 or 3 languages simultaneously was at its optimum during the period from birth to 6 years of age, during the first stage of development, because this is the age when language is formed. This is the period when the sounds, the intonations, the music of a language that are part of a foreign language can be learned perfectly effortlessly. Let's take a look at the child's understanding mind. This is the 6 to 12 plane of development. And from the age of 6 or 7, children have already developed their intellectual skills, which neuroscientists call today executive functions. This is what Maria Montessori called the spirit of understanding, or the spirit of exploration. The child says, "Teach me to think for myself." It's during this period that we're going to help the child structure his new skills, everything he's been integrating since birth. He's in a sensitive period of cognitive flexibility and working memory, so we'll be able to give him specific materials for grammatical structure, spelling, and vocabulary enrichment. He will enjoy memorizing songs in all 3 languages and poetry in English, in French, and also in LSF with great ease. And as he enters his first year of elementary school, he is actually beginning his 5th year of English and LSF if he arrived with us as a French speaker at the age of 2. He memorizes the dactylology, the signs that make up the LSF alphabet, with impressive speed. If he hasn't yet learned the sign for something, he likes to spell out the words as quickly as he can. At this stage, it becomes a game. He has a manual dexterity that we adults don't have. And this manual dexterity has been honed during his time in the toddler community and the children's house. Neuroscientists and linguists today increasingly agree with Maria Montessori that there is a sensitive period for language. Ghislaine de Haen-Lamberts and Stanislas de Haen have demonstrated that cognitive science says very clearly that it is absolutely necessary to teach foreign languages to very young children from birth, in creches, in baby daycares, nursery schools, and kindergarten. At this age, they learn without an effort. The brain absorbs a second or third language easily, remains impregnated in the cells, and is the opposite of learning in the brain of an adolescent or the brain of an adult, which will require much more effort over a much longer period of time. Studies have shown that babies' brains tune in to any language or languages they hear from their caregiver. By the time they are 11 or 12 months old, their brains reflect only the language or languages to which the baby has been exposed. This supports the hypothesis that there is indeed a sensitive, critical language period. In a Montessori school, the language acquisition program is very rich from the moment the child arrives at the age of 2, knowing that the toddler and child between 2 and 6 is in his or her first stage of development, and therefore in his or her sensitive language period, we provide practical life material with all the vocabulary that goes with it in French, English, and LSF, French Sign Language. Mealtime activities, gardening, houseplants, storytelling, singing songs, short sketches, setting the table, bread making, cooking workshop. These are all opportunities to enrich the child's vocabulary in all 3 languages. The adults around the child use correct and accurate language. At E.M.I.T, nighty-night is called sleep time, or rest time, or tired, as well as the sign in LSF, for example. Then, from the age 3 to 6, in addition to the practical life material, which becomes more and more elaborate, we have sensorial material. All sensorial activities are indirect preparations for maths, language, and science. We refine the ear and hearing of young children using sensorial materials such as sound boxes and bells, representing the piano scale, to give them auditory skills and sharpen their hearing. Deaf children can also hone their ability to feel sounds through vibrations. And the Montessori material is very helpful for that. We know that a child with good auditory skills or good powers of concentration for the deaf child will be a child who will develop language to its highest potential. From the earliest age, the silence lesson, or the silence game, is also designed to train the ear to hear a variety of sounds, as well as to be totally silent. When a group gathers to play the silence game, they share a solemn moment of total silence, and then, at the end, they share all the sounds that they have heard: a car passing by, a truck, birds, people talking, a dog barking, the wind, the rain. In a world where our children are constantly assailed by an overload of stimuli, this game is salutary. Not only for refining their hearing, but also for introspection, for becoming aware of our feelings. Silence is essential for reflection. The lesson of silence should never be confused with a classroom where children have to remain silent. It's more like an active silence, when children have the chance to share their school life with deaf children, and vice versa. They can also become aware of what a child who can't hear might feel. It's another way of understanding differences, another means of integration. Coming back to multilingualism, sensorial material in terms of semantics emphasizes the qualities that describe our world. The toddler learns to describe things, to differentiate objects, and to name differences with great detail and precision in all 3 languages. Sensorial material help children to develop their language skills, enabling them to refine their language, judge, and describe things. They learn to use comparatives and superlatives appropriately. In addition to sensorial material, Maria Montessori developed a wealth of vocabulary building materials. For the past 12 years, we have been producing vocabulary enrichment material in LSF because it doesn't exist anywhere, and it's not something that we can purchase somewhere. So we've been creating it for over 12 years, like I said. Through botanical material with parts of a leaf, parts of a tree, a flower, shapes of land, parts of a mushroom, a root, for example, and in geography, notions of geology as well, like shapes of land and water. The child enriches his vocabulary during the sensitive language period. They do so in a playful way because it's fun to realize that the lake is the opposite of the island by using fun, exciting material out of clay earth and beautiful crystal blue water. It's always concrete to abstract, playful in order to respect another sensitive period, that of movement. Another very interesting point in research today is phonetic awareness in young children. Once again, Maria Montessori was a century ahead of modern research, and this is one of the reasons why this pedagogy endures throughout the world today. In the Montessori Children's House, the child, in an environment so well adapted to his needs, between the age of 3 and 6, becomes aware that a word is made up of sounds, that sounds are made up of letters or made up of a phonetic alphabet. Because we teach him the phonetic alphabet or the sound of the letters before the names of the letters. We teach him how to construct a word and therefore the mechanism of writing before learning how to read. These sounds are then put together to create phonemes, the small units of speech. Before the age of 6, the child becomes aware of this in both languages. And for the deaf child in a Montessori learning environment, the sounds of the letters are replaced by the dactylology, the LSF sign alphabet. This is yet another reason why the Montessori method of teaching is so wonderful for the integration of deaf children. A lot of the new vocabulary in the 3 languages is learned in what we call the 3-step lesson, and this enables the educator to assess how well the child has integrated these new concepts without the young child even realizing that he or she is being assessed. Maria Montessori had observed how Edouard Seguin taught deaf children in 3 stages and implemented the same principle in the use of her material. In the first stage, it's the association of the new vocabulary with the object in question, such as I'm holding a tablet that's red, and I say to the child, red, which is associated with the word red. When I take the same tablet, in the second stage, I will say to the child, show me red. So he is hearing the word, and he is associating the word with the object. That's the second stage, the recognition of that particular word. And the third step is the integration of this new word. What is this? And this is the sign for the educator, the green light, if you wish, to continue building a solid foundation with the toddler or the young child by making new introductions, whether it be in French, in English, or in LSF. Now with a deaf child, for example, instead of saying red, then we would spell out the word red with the dactylology, or give him the sign for the word red. We know that the first 6 years of a child's life are the sensitive period of vocabulary acquisition, and the children of E.M.I.T have been learning vocabulary in all 3 languages since they arrived at the age of 2 or 3, using all the sensorial material in a very playful way. So the slide that we have up here now shows what happens during the first 6 years of the Montessori school environment. OPAL, known as one person, one language, is the method and the one method that we recommend to all of the families at the school, and the one that has always been used at the school. One teacher, one language, which means that in each classroom environment, we have an English-speaking Montessori teacher, a French-speaking Montessori teacher, and a deaf assistant. The first deaf assistants were trained in France to be able to work at E.M.I.T, at the French Institute, A.M.I. Institute. So this method is the most widely used throughout the world and the most successful in studies with infants in their family environment. The school makes a distinction between learning the cursive letters in French, the print letters in English, and the dactylology for the deaf children. A deaf child will learn the letters of the alphabet in one of the two languages, depending on his needs in the future. And up until now, it has always been the sign language and French, because we have never welcomed, up until now, Anglophone deaf children, which would be much more complicated because sign language is not like an Esperanto type language. It's not the same sign language all over the world. Every language has its own sign language. So you have LSF, which is Langue des Signes Française, but you have ASL, which is the American Sign Language, and you have the British Sign Language, and you have the Italian Sign Language. The French Sign Language for the deaf and the American Sign Language for the deaf are the two languages that are the closest and resemble one another the most, because of the fact that in the middle of the 19th century, or towards the end of the 19th century, the French were no longer allowed to use sign language that was invented in France in the beginning, if we talk about the history of LSF, and they were legally not allowed to use sign language. We wanted children to learn to oralize, which was an extremely violent way of teaching deaf children. To tie their hands behind their backs, for example, so that they wouldn't use their hands to try to describe things. So it was a very violent way for children to learn language. But the French left the country and went to the United States, where the first and biggest university is formed there. The school also uses the TWI program, two-way immersion, which is the best for schools. There is no timetable for English, French, or LSF. People call and say, well, how many hours of English do you do? How many hours of LSF are there? How many hours of French are there in the classroom? And that's not the way it works. It works in the way, like the one person, one language, the children are immersed in all three languages from the time they arrive in the hallway of the school to the time they leave, all throughout the day. So it's not French in the morning and English in the afternoon. In fact, all the children are totally immersed in the three languages. We're going to take a look at brain plasticity. Neuroscientist Stanislas Dehaene has been looking at the way in which immigrant children learn. He gave a presentation, thank you very much. Is that what? Yes, wonderful. He gave a presentation entitled La plasticité cérébrale et le bilinguisme, atouts et difficultés des migrants, brain plasticity and bilingualism, assets and difficulties for migrants, at the Collège de France at a colloquium in 2016. In his studies of the brain, he talks about cerebral plasticity, which means the ability of neurons at contact points, the synapses, to evolve and adapt. A toddler's brain is already highly constructed and structured, and its cerebral plasticity is at its optimum. With millions, now we know with the research done by Changeux in 2017, we know that we have up to 10 million synapses that take place in in the brain of a very young child in the span of a minute, a second, I believe it is. Yes, 10 million synapses per second. It just baffles my mind, really. Here we have 3 circles. We have a circle or a sphere with the internet. We have the adult brain, which is 3 times more complex, and we have the child's brain, which is 10 times more complex. And I'm going to get a friend of mine who specialized in AI to help me add a 4th sphere, because we really need to add that 4th circle with what the AI circle looks like today compared to the internet. It would be very interesting to see that. So the plasticity is neither universal nor infinite, and it has its limits. Stanislas Dehaene agrees with Maria Montessori when he speaks of sensitivity or windows that open onto critical or sensitive periods when learning is at its peak. One of these sensitive or critical periods concerns the learning of phonemes or language in young children. The 9-month-old baby already discriminates all the phonemes of various languages, but from 12 months on, the baby will discriminate only phonemes of his own language, or of both maternal or paternal language in the case of the bilingual baby. Cerebral plasticity is what enables a small child to acquire 1, 2, or 3 languages with such ease and naturalness. We can see by observing newborn babies how they react when they hear their mother's voice all of a sudden speaking in a different language than his own. In the construction of language, Patricia Kuehl's research shows that if we were to mix all the world's languages together, we'd have 800 distinct sounds, but that each language contains only about 40 sounds or phonemes, and it's this that distinguishes one language from another. All Montessorians know just how powerful a child's brain can be before the age of 3. The child's potential is inviolable because in the first years of life, he can learn any language he hears. By the time they reach adolescence, the plasticity is less and less present, and the period is less favorable for learning a foreign language. I don't know about all of you in the room today, but I started learning a foreign language when I was 13. In the United States, we learned Spanish as a second language, and it wasn't taught during the very first years of school. It was taught at the beginning of adolescence. And I remember thinking, I have other things to think about than learning this language. And it's just not the right time. It just isn't. The adolescent brain is going to really struggle in order to learn this other language very differently than the baby or the child's brain. So why are people bilingual or multilingual? It's when a child hears his parents speaking 2 languages. It's when a family moves abroad and has to learn the language of the new country, but at the same time keeps a link with the country and the language of origin. When a child goes to a school where he or she learns a second or third language. We've welcomed children at E.M.I.T that arrive with Dutch father language, Arab mother language, arrive at school, and then all of a sudden will learn English, French, and LSF. And I can assure you, because I've spent 35 years in these schools, after about 2 months, the children are just right in there. They're on the page, and they are understanding everything that the teachers and adults that are around them are saying. And they're also learning with the other children. So that makes it a lot of fun. So then we end up with a child that has to move back to London after he's been in Paris for 3 years. And he moves back to London and he integrates into an English-speaking school in London, and it doesn't pose the slightest problem for him. And he's at that stage. We can't say he is quadrilingual, but we can say that he has learned the languages at a time in his life where it is embedded in the cells of his brains, and then later on, when he's going to need those languages again, he'll be able to dive right back into it. So it's also when a family lives in a country with several native languages, like I said earlier. And historically speaking, when there have been explorers or colonizers who have created the need to learn another language. So why LSF? Why la langue des signes française and not another more fashionable language, a language that's used more throughout the planet, like Spanish or Chinese, for example? Well, Maria Montessori's scientific pedagogy is not synonymous with bilingualism and even less with trilingualism. So what does LSF have to do with a Montessori school? The question often arises as to whether the school is a special ed school specialized in working with deaf children. When you consider the importance that Maria Montessori had given to the sensorial teaching of the materials for all learning, and that the youngest children learn through these scientific materials designed to expose and imbue the child's mind and hand with abstract concepts, you can understand its full meaning today. It's throughout the work of the hand that the child will reveal abstract concepts to his mind, to his brain. Learning is best when it's associated with working with the hand, with movement. Through research, through Maria Montessori's research, she concluded that in children, the hand is the most important vector of intelligence. Numerous current studies corroborate what Maria Montessori foresaw. The deaf child can benefit from this very rich environment in a very playful way. The materials are so perfectly adapted to his or her needs. Kathy Rogers and Michael Thomas speak about the pyramid of priorities in their new book, Educational Neuroscience, that just and the importance of sensory motor learning experience, and how in the pyramid of priorities, it's right up at the top. So it's very important to have all of this sensorial material at an age where the child is ready to take it all in. Angeline Stoll-Lillard, I'm sure you've all heard about her. No Montessori has not, I believe. A PhD in psychology from Stanford University and currently a professor at the University of Virginia. She writes in her book, Montessori, The Science Behind the Genius, which was translated into French by my friend Charlotte Poussin, Montessori, or I'll say it in English, Montessori, a pedagogical revolution backed by science. Montessori, une révolution pédagogique soutenue par la science. That the latest research shows that sign language helps symbolic learning in infants. Babies learning ASL, American Sign Language, can name objects with gestures earlier than children learning only oral language. Studies show that, and I believe, yes, I did put it up on this slide, thank you. Studies show, for example, that infants learning only ASL arrive at a list of 10 words 4 months earlier than infants learning only spoken language. When babies learn both languages simultaneously, ASL and spoken language, they learn both languages at the same rate. A multitude of studies show that babies who learn sign language will communicate more easily and quickly. This was confirmed during my visit and observations that I did at the Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., the world's largest university for the deaf, greatly influenced by the two Frenchmen, Edouard Gallaudet and Laurent Clerc, in the mid-19th century. I observed babies in the daycare learning ASL with their parents. In the language learning toddler, the transition from the one-word to the two-word phase occurs earlier in the child who has had sign language. Symbolic understanding can be communicated to children through hand movements or gestures long before verbal communication. This can also help children with oral language difficulties. With sign language, little babies can communicate about their needs with those around them way before they even learn to speak. I'm thirsty. I'm hungry. I'm cold. I'm scared, for example. Other studies show that children understand certain words or explanations better when they are accompanied with gestures. Maria Montessori said that the child's brain develops through the use of the hand. We're always amazed at how easy it is for the toddlers in our school, as well as the elementary students, to sign to each other and have signed conversations with Marie, Jennifer, Matt, and Maureen, our Montessori deaf assistants. Another reason is to enable two worlds that almost never meet, from early childhood onwards, to live together and to get to know each other better. Here, we demystify the word handicap, and you should see the joy of the children when they're working together. Recent research indicates that young children learning a second or third language have better attention to executive functions. We'll go through the photos very quickly. Here, a little girl is learning the signs for animal names. She's working with Marie. She's very happy to be doing what she's doing. Two other children observing. And we have Marie, who's just about ready to give the sign for butterfly. And the excitement on this little boy's face, because he knows the sign already. She's probably done it with him before, but the anticipation of those two hands that are going to turn into the butterfly and fly away. It's just so much fun. And here we have two older girls, 8-year-olds, that the words that they're looking at on the bulletin board in the hallway of the school, they don't know what the signs are, so they're just spelling them out, and they're very quick at it. So what are the advantages of bilingualism or multilingualism? It helps develop translation skills. It facilitates early adaptation. It's selective attention, leading to better concentration, creative thinking, greater planning and problem-solving performance, a cognitive advantage, better working memory. Bilinguals are not only exposed to another language, but also to another culture, leading to great acceptance and understanding of others, a higher level of executive function, easier multitasking, greater efficiency and speed in brain monitoring systems, especially when under pressure to perform, or a more stable brain in the tasks required. A clear improvement in the ability to understand the mechanics of language, making it easier to learn a third, a fourth, or a fifth language. We've seen this with children that leave our school, learn a third or fourth language in their new school, and then move on to learn a fifth or sixth or seventh or eighth language later on. So what role can an adult play? The adult can learn about the advantages and disadvantages of speaking two or more languages. They can understand the developmental stages of language acquisition. They can recognize that the environment has a huge impact on development, especially in terms of the quality and quantity of spoken language in the child's environment. That the desire and motivation to speak should never be ignored. Not only that, but now we know that these benefits persist into old age. It has been shown that bilingual elderly people will develop Alzheimer's disease 5 years later than monolingual elderly people. Bilingualism could be a cerebral protective factor for the elderly. And this is research that was done by Patricia Peterson in 2017, amongst others. Being bilingual or trilingual doesn't just mean mastering 2 or 3 languages. Multilingualism also brings educational, social, economic, cultural, and political benefits. There are far more advantages than disadvantages. Contrary to popular belief, bilingualism is not an obstacle to learning or language quality. If there are any language difficulties, this will surely be due to language developmental problems and not the fact that there are two languages. Caroline Erdos, a speech-language pathologist at the Montreal Hospital, is convinced that even children with language disorders can learn a second language from the earliest age on, and that this will help them in their general learning. The simplest way, she believes, is one parent, one language. So we know, and that's just as well, because that's what we've been using as the approach at E.M.I.T since 1989, as well as the recommended approach with the family. So here, this slide is just a list of different, just for the end, if you want to take a photo of this slide, it's the different research that has taken place. Patricia Kuehl, who's the neuroscientist at the University of Washington's Institute for Learning and Brain Science, has published a wealth of information and research on the subject of language learning and multilingualism. A longitudinal study showed that bilingual babies, English-Spanish, had higher cognitive flexibility scores than monolingual babies. These results show that the different experiences of bilingual babies, children and adults, help to shape the brain, and that they are more capable of solving complex tasks, reversing rules, being more flexible, and, as we say in English, they're more easily capable of thinking outside the box. They are also more open to learning new languages as part of their personal development. And as far as E.M.I.T is concerned, we're lucky enough to be able to pass on not just 3 languages, but several cultures to the young children in our care. The English-speaking educators come from a multitude of different countries, and bring with them a variety of different cultures. The deaf assistants introduce young children to deaf culture. It's an enriching experience for the children, opening their minds to the world and fostering autonomy and easy adaptation to new situation, therefore to a new world. Thank you very much.
Patricia, thank you. I must admit, I sort of feel that your presentation was just wonderful in terms of how it integrated all the languages and how you integrated it with with a foreign language, not to see it as a different kind of language, but it's just one of the other languages. So that's what's my takeaway from it. But I hope that you all enjoyed it, because I certainly did. Please accept this as part of our appreciation of you being here and preparing this wonderful presentation. And I should say too how wonderful that you've dedicated yourself to this work for children with these special needs.
And now it's Montessori in Madagascar.
Yes.
So that's French Malagasy.
Yeah.
Because I do need to say that in Madagascar, when there are bilingual schools, they do French-English, but they forget the Malagasy. So children that have Malagasy at home don't have it at school. So we are starting off the bilingual school in Madagascar. It will be French Malagasy, and then we'll become trilingual with French Malagasy and English.
Wow.
But the Malagasy and the French first.
Yeah. Fantastic.